Hey, old man! This dojo is not a place for old-fashioned people to show off.
Ryan's voice cut through the noise of Cedar Falls Martial Arts Academy, sharp as a blade and dripping with contempt. Behind him, a cluster of black belt students burst into laughter, the hollow, metallic kind that echoed off the walls bathed in morning light. Parents lined along the wall. Some turned away. Others exchanged uneasy glances. On the mat in the center, the kids were still stretching and warming up, and by the doorway stood a black man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a faded flannel shirt and worn-out shoes, motionless like a statue. Ryan Briggs, the youngest black belt in the academy, raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with mockery. "Why don't you come out here and show us a few moves, old man? Might be fun." His friends burst out laughing, slapping each other on the back. Some of the parents lowered their heads, embarrassed for him. When Thomas gently pulled up his sleeve, a long faded scar appeared on his arm, a wound that had healed on the skin, but not in memory. He said quietly, just 3 words. "That won't be necessary." 3 words, enough to thicken the air. Ryan crossed his arms and smirked. "Don't be scared. We're just messing around. We'll go easy on you." Thomas looked down at the mat, then raised his eyes. That look, calm, cold, and forged like tempered steel, froze Ryan for half a second. The laughter died. No one could explain why their throats tightened, only that the silence surrounding the man seemed to have a sound of its own. A soft tap echoed, the heel of a shoe brushing the wooden floor. It was quiet, yet it split the tension like glass. The young men glanced at one another, suddenly unsure. Thomas stood still, head slightly bowed. Not in submission, but in certainty. Ryan forced a laugh and threw another jab. "What, you some secret master or something, training in some hidden dojo?" Thomas lifted his head. The pale gray of his eyes caught the overhead light. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. He tilted his chin slightly, just enough for Ryan's smirk to vanish. His friends turned back to their drills, but their laughter had lost all conviction. People began glancing toward the wall, toward the old man who hadn't moved, yet somehow changed the rhythm of the entire room. No one realized it yet, but though Thomas hadn't taken a single step, every movement now revolved around him. When Master Alvarez called for a water break, students dispersed. Ryan lingered, his voice loud and teasing. "Still here, old man?" Thomas only nodded, silent. Ryan sneered, but Marcus, the tall black belt beside him, chuckled and added, "Probably didn't hear you. He's old." A few weak laughs followed. Thomas's eyes flicked to Marcus, calm, heavy, unblinking. Ryan pressed on. "What's that look? Reminiscing about your glory days?" Thomas blinked, and in that instant, he heard it again. The thudding rotor of a helicopter, the sting of salt and sand, the voice of a comrade calling his name through the radio. Then it all faded, leaving only the bright dojo and the sound of children's laughter. He rolled his sleeve back down, a burning pulse rising from the scar into his chest. The sound of mats slapping and voices calling techniques filled the air. Thomas shifted his stance, watching every movement, the balance, the timing, the breath. In his eyes, each small error stood out like a breach in discipline. His fingers brushed his pocket, the outline of a worn metal tag, his dog tag, carried for more than 20 years. Not for pride, but as a reminder that he was still alive. Ryan threw Marcus with a flashy hip toss, then looked up proudly. "See that? In real life, that's a broken arm." Laughter rose again. Thomas stepped away from the wall, each stride deliberate, measured. The room went quiet. A mother whispered, "Is he actually going to spar?" Thomas stopped at the edge of the mat, his voice low but steady. "Your elbow's open." Ryan frowned. "What?" "You didn't lock your arm. The kid could escape." Before anyone could react, Marcus tried the move again. A twist, a pull. Slam! Ryan hit the mat flat on his back, caught in a clean hold. Laughter erupted, but this time, no one laughed at Thomas. They laughed at Ryan. Ryan scrambled to his feet, face flushed. That was just luck. But his eyes betrayed the flicker of fear. Master Alvarez said nothing. His gaze lingered on Thomas, the kind of look exchanged between men who've seen real battles. Thomas returned to his spot by the wall, his hand resting over his shirt pocket where the dog tag lay still. Something long dormant within him stirred. Not pride, not anger, but precision. The noise resumed, though it now sounded hollow. Parents exchanged glances. Some smiled faintly without knowing why. Others sat up straighter, feeling a quiet unease. Ryan went back to the mat, hitting harder, moving faster, but every strike was desperate, uncontrolled. Thomas, meanwhile, stood unmoved, like an old oak rooted in a storm. And in that room, everyone seemed to understand one simple truth. True strength doesn't need to be shown. It simply stands still, and everything else adjusts around it. On the benches, a 14-year-old boy sat with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the man by the wall. His name was Daniel. His mother had enrolled him in the dojo to learn focus, not fighting. He'd been quiet all morning, but since that moment, his gaze hadn't left the old man. "Mom," Daniel whispered. "He saw that coming." His mother frowned, puzzled. Thomas remained upright, hands clasped behind his back, posture relaxed yet controlled. A body long accustomed to belonging exactly where it stood. When Master Alvarez called another water break, students rushed toward their bottles and benches. Only Ryan stayed behind, half smiling, his voice echoing across the room. "Still standing there, old man?" He said it while glancing sideways at Thomas, trying to flaunt his little victory with a smug grin. "See that? In real life, that'd be a dislocated shoulder." The bragging had barely ended when Thomas stepped away from the wall. His steps were slow, steady, and utterly silent. A mother whispered, "Is he actually going onto the mat?" Thomas stopped at the edge of the mat. His voice was low, clear, like wind moving through wood. "Your elbow's open." Ryan frowned. "What?" "You didn't lock your arm. The kid could escape." His tone wasn't harsh or challenging. It was simply matter of fact. Marcus smirked and tried again. A small twist, a clean pull. Slam! Ryan hit the mat flat on his back. Laughter burst through the room, loud and unrestrained. But this time, no one laughed at Thomas. They laughed because of Ryan. Ryan sprang up, his face bright red. "Just luck." But his eyes darted, unfocused. Everyone in the room knew. Luck had nothing to do with it. Parents began murmuring. The children stopped watching Ryan and turned their attention to the black man who had spoken just one sentence, and flipped the balance of the room. Master Alvarez narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He understood. This man wasn't just another onlooker. Thomas returned to his place by the wall, his stance unchanged. His hand rested on his pocket, where the dog tag lay still, the cold metal pressed into his palm, a fragment of a buried past, now faintly warming again. It wasn't pride. It wasn't anger. It was precision, the thing he had lived by for more than half his life. The air in the dojo shifted. The laughter thinned and scattered. A father muttered, "If he's just here to watch, why doesn't he sit down?" But Thomas remained standing, motionless like a pillar. Every time Ryan glanced over, those cold gray eyes met his. Not mocking, not disdainful, but with the calm certainty of someone who had already measured his limits. Silence spread like a chill draft creeping under a door. The rhythmic calls of training continued, but no one's mind was on the drills anymore. Their thoughts circled back and settled on the figure by the wall. A silver-haired man, Harold, a retired police officer, leaned toward another parent and murmured, "See how he's standing? That's not random. That's a combat stance. Men like that, they don't learn it in a gym. They learn it somewhere much harsher. Thomas tugged lightly at his sleeve. For an instant, the pale scar flashed under the fabric, then disappeared. His thumb lingered on the cuff, a second longer than necessary. The memories flooded back. The burning desert, 20 years ago. Convoys crawling through sand, voices over the radio. Hail, take point. Blinding heat. Gunfire. And then silence. The deadly kind. That scar was from that night, the night he lost his team and carried home a promise etched beneath his skin. Thomas opened his eyes again. The dojo came back into focus. The laughter of children, the clapping of mats, the crisp shouts of practice. But inside him, the battlefield still murmured. His fingers brushed the dog tag. The metal was freezing, yet it steadied his mind. Ryan noticed the motion and sneered. "What are you fondling in your pocket, old man? Nervous, or just shaking from age?" His voice was loud, meant for everyone to hear. A few weak laughs broke out, but no one dared to keep laughing for long. Thomas didn't reply, didn't look up. His hand stayed in his pocket, his shoulders square, his eyes calm. On the bench, Daniel leaned forward. He had seen the glint of metal at Thomas's pocket, and the way the man touched it, not like a habit, but like a ritual. He didn't understand, but something inside him knew. It wasn't jewelry. It was history, and the man wasn't ordinary. Ryan's taunt died mid-air. The room's noise sank into a heavy stillness. Thomas stood motionless, expression unchanged. His silence was louder than any retort. Daniel's mother placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't stare, Daniel," he whispered. "He's different from them. He doesn't need to shout." Harold leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Eyes that had read hundreds of reports now studied Thomas. The posture, the scar, the stillness. And a cold shiver ran down his spine. Master Alvarez switched the routine, balance, control, proper falling technique. The students obeyed, except Ryan. He trained harder, clumsier, desperate to reclaim attention. But every time he glanced toward the wall, Thomas was still there, calm, silent, like a storm waiting for wind to rise. Inside Thomas, memories churned. The sweep of helicopter lights across a rocky ridge, faces caked in sand, eyes of steel. The mission brief: infiltrate, rescue, protect. But war is never simple. Gunfire, smoke, comrades falling. He remembered carrying one man across a ravine lit by tracer rounds. The tear on his arm, a souvenir from that night. The tag in his pocket, it belonged to the man he couldn't bring back. His hand tightened, not in grief, but in silent remembrance. Then Ryan barked out, voice sharp with frustration. "What are you even doing here, huh? Think you're better than us? Standing there like some kind of saint." The entire room froze. Parents shifted uncomfortably. Students lowered their eyes. Thomas turned his head, slowly. The gray eyes locked onto Ryan's. No anger, no fear. Only steel. He said nothing. Yet his silence weighed more than any reprimand could. Ryan took half a step back. The air thickened, as if every breath in the room had been trapped in glass. The silence stretched so long that some students paused mid-movement, uncertain whether to continue. Master Alvarez hesitated, then motioned for practice to resume. Thomas still didn't speak. He didn't need to. That look, and the deliberate turn of his head, was a rejection of a fight he could easily win. And that very refusal cut deeper than any insult. Ryan forced a smile, but it crumbled at the edges. Harold lowered his head and murmured, softly enough for those nearby to hear, "I've seen that look before. At discharge ceremonies, men coming back from the Gulf had that same silence. Not anger, not fear, just calculation." His words rippled outward, reaching the ears of nearby students. And in that moment, not just Ryan, but the entire dojo understood. The quiet black man standing at the corner of the wall was no ordinary old man. A young girl whispered to her friend, "Who is he?" No one answered. There was no more laughter. Ryan tried to shake it off, shouting at his partner and slamming him down hard on the mat. But every throw was stiff, heavy, an act of force trying to hide fear. Each impact rang hollow, like metal striking the emptiness inside him. Every time Ryan glanced sideways, Thomas was still there. No smirk, no mockery, just watching. Heat crawled up Ryan's neck. On the bench, Daniel tilted his head and whispered, "Mom, he hasn't even moved." His mother motioned for silence, but her eyes too stayed on the calm man by the wall. Thomas adjusted his sleeve. The long pale scar flashed once, then vanished. Not an accident's mark, but a memory engraved into skin. Marcus saw it, and his grin died instantly. "Ryan," he muttered, nudging his friend. Ryan looked too, his laugh caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the scar before it disappeared under the cuff. A wound like that didn't belong to ordinary life. It spoke of battlefields, steel, and survival. For the first time, Ryan had no words. Thomas remained silent, fingers brushing the pocket where the dog tag lay. Cold, heavy, anchoring him to the present. The observant few noticed, Daniel and Harold, the retired cop. They understood. It wasn't a keepsake. It was proof of a life spent in combat. The atmosphere shifted again. Laughter evaporated, replaced by confusion and unease. Master Alvarez clapped once, calling for a reflex drill, escape before a hold locks in. He paired students off and stepped back, arms folded. Ryan's eyes stayed on Thomas. The mockery was gone, but the need to challenge still burned. Daniel leaned forward, barely breathing. Alvarez called for a volunteer. No one moved. Ryan smirked, raising his hand. "I'll go." He picked Marcus and stepped to the center of the mat, but his eyes never left Thomas. The black man hadn't moved an inch. Ryan set up a picture-perfect stance, pivot, breakaway, counterlock, pin. He grinned wide, waiting for applause. None came. Only a calm, steady voice filled the room. "Your grip is too weak." Ryan froze. Before he could respond, Marcus adjusted his wrist angle, stepped in, just one beat, and Ryan's lock collapsed. He stumbled forward, crashing to the mat. Marcus stared at his own hands, astonished. He hadn't expected it to work so effortlessly. A ripple of quiet awe swept the room. Parents leaned forward, students exchanged glances. Ryan shot up, face blazing, mouth opening but no words forming. Thomas still leaned against the wall. He hadn't taken a single step, yet with one small correction, he dismantled a performance polished over years. Harold exhaled sharply through his nose and muttered, "He's not an observer. He's been there." Daniel's eyes gleamed. He understood. Even Alvarez looked at Thomas differently now. Respect had begun to shift. Ryan clenched his fists, seething with humiliation and anger. But beneath the rough edges of emotion, a spark of fear flickered. Because deep down, he knew. The man didn't just see technique. He saw through him. The dojo no longer belonged to Ryan. Every gaze, every breath, now leaned toward Thomas. Ryan's friends felt it too. Marcus rubbed his wrist, still trembling. Eric, the broad-shouldered black belt, whispered, "Don't let him get in your head. Just luck, man." But even his voice trembled. Ryan puffed out his chest, jaw tight. He'd been cut down twice in front of everyone. He couldn't let it end there. He snapped toward Thomas, shouting, "Enough of the act! If you've got something to prove, come out here!" The room froze. Parents exchanged uneasy looks. The children went dead quiet. Thomas didn't move. Ryan's voice rose, trembling with adrenaline. "What's wrong, huh? Scared? Standing there like you're better than everyone, then prove it." Master Alvarez lifted a hand to intervene, but Ryan cut him off. "With all due respect, sir, this man thinks he can teach us, then let him teach." Thomas drew a slow breath. His shoulders lifted and fell. smooth as a tide. He stepped forward. The soles of his shoes clicked softly on the wooden floor. The air thickened. Even the hum of the heater seemed to fade. He looked Ryan in the eye, voice low and firm. 1 round, no more. Ryan smirked, masking his frayed nerves with bravado. Perfect, Thomas added. Watch carefully. When it's over, you'll apologize. Not a threat, not anger. A promise. A shiver rippled through the room. Daniel gripped his knees until his knuckles whitened. Harold muttered, "That kid has no idea what he just asked for." Alvarez didn't stop them. Some moments can't be restrained. Ryan bowed theatrically, mocking. Thomas inclined his head simply. No flourish, no ego. The challenge was set. Ryan circled, heavy-footed, chest out, grin wide. 23, fast, strong, and full of the arrogance of youth. To him, this was a show meant to humiliate an old man. Thomas stepped onto the mat, removed his shoes, left only worn socks on the white tatami. Yet his stance looked perfectly placed, balanced, centered, grounded. Ryan flexed his arms and scoffed, "Ready, old man? Don't worry, I'll take it easy." His friends laughed too loudly, the sound exposing their nerves. Thomas didn't answer. He set his feet shoulder-width apart, knees soft, shoulders relaxed, hands open. A stance no one in the room recognized. Eric frowned. "That's not a guard. What the hell is that?" Harold leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "He's already in position." Ryan lunged, fast and sharp. His hand sliced through empty air. Thomas turned half a beat, pivoting lightly on the ball of his foot, sliding out of range as if the air itself moved him. The room held its breath. Thomas didn't strike, didn't block, didn't counter. He simply wasn't where Ryan thought he'd be. Ryan froze for a second, forcing a shaky grin. "Quick one, huh?" But the smile cracked at the edges. Thomas stood motionless, those steel-gray eyes unblinking. Alvarez folded his arms, brows tightening. He saw it instantly. This wasn't demonstration, it wasn't sport, it was the language of survival. Silence blanketed the room. The sound of feet brushing the mat cracked like lightning. Ryan bounced on the balls of his feet, swaggering. But the grin glued to his face was only a thin mask, one that couldn't hide the flicker of shock in his eyes. Bit by bit, his arrogance fell away. Thomas stayed still. Not a wasted motion, not an ounce of unnecessary effort. His arms hung loosely, as if he hadn't entered a fight at all, only waited for what was inevitable. Ryan lunged again, faster, sharper, a straight punch shot toward Thomas's chest. Thomas pivoted on his heel, shifting half an inch, leaning aside as gently as a breath. The punch sliced through air. Gasps rippled around the room. No block, no counter, no contact. The strike simply evaporated. Alvarez pressed his lips together. He had seen this before, something not learned in any dojo, but earned through thousands of hours in places where mistakes meant death. Ryan laughed too loudly, his voice cracking at the end. "Not bad, old man." But the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Thomas's gaze, cold, steady, heavier than any blow, was the only answer. From the bench, Daniel gripped his mother's hand. "Mom, did you see? He didn't even touch him, but he dodged." "Shh," she whispered, though her wide eyes spoke the same word Daniel had just said. Astonishment. Harold's voice was gravelly, trembling with respect. "That's real training. You can't fake that." Sweat rolled down Ryan's temple. He wiped it quickly, forcing a grin, but fear was rising. He ducked low, sweeping a leg. Thomas stepped back, smooth, effortless like water flowing around stone. The sweep cut through emptiness. Ryan stumbled, off balance. Thomas didn't strike. He simply reset his stance, shoulders relaxed, breathing, calm. The room was dead silent, and for the first time, fear marked Ryan's face. He understood now. The man before him wasn't an old relic. He was someone who had faced far deadlier opponents. Thomas exhaled softly. the calm before the storm. Every gaze in the dojo fixed on the center of the mat. Ryan wiped his face, trying to pull his swagger back on, but his smile had become nothing more than a paper mask. Thomas didn't circle, didn't pace. He moved with Ryan, matching every step like a compass needle locked on north, always centered, always precise. Ryan hissed, "You just gonna stand there like a statue?" His voice cracked under the strain of fear. Thomas remained silent. His silence had become its own language. Daniel whispered, "He doesn't have to move. He already knows." Alvarez crossed his arms, his eyes sharpening. He saw what most couldn't. The perfect weight distribution, the ruthless economy of motion. This wasn't karate. It wasn't judo. It was military discipline. Ryan spun into a wide leg sweep. Thomas turned his hips slightly, and Ryan crashed face first into the mat. The breath knocked from his chest. Parents stood up. The kids froze, mouths open. Ryan scrambled to his feet, gasping. Just slipped, that's all." Harold shook his head, his voice low and shaking. "Fourth time, he's trained, the kind of training people don't come back from the same." Ryan's fists trembled. Thomas looked at him. His eyes softened, almost sorrowful. His voice came calm and deep, cutting through the room. "Stop fighting your own weight. What's beating you is you." The words were simple, direct, undeniable. Ryan froze. The room held its breath. No one was waiting for a punch anymore. They were waiting for truth. Thomas shifted for the first time, drawn in, centered, coiled, like a spring about to release. Everyone could feel it. The real storm was coming. Ryan trembled inside but shouted louder to hide it, charging forward. A right hook whipped toward Thomas's jaw, the kind that usually makes opponents cry out. Thomas tilted his head half an inch. The fist passed through air. Before Ryan could recover, Thomas's hand lifted, not gripping, just two fingertips brushing his opponent's shoulder. A touch as light as wind, and Ryan's balance collapsed. He fell forward, hard. A stunned gasp swept the room. Ryan shot up, furious. "Again!" He lunged with a flying knee. Thomas raised an open palm, guiding the force aside. Ryan's legs slipped past. His own momentum spun him, and he crashed to the mat once more. The children sat frozen like statues. Parents clutched their seats. Even Alvarez leaned forward, his expression darkening, as if remembering things he'd tried to forget. And still, Thomas hadn't thrown a single strike. He was dismantling the boy, layer by layer, stripping away illusion with nothing but truth, balance, and timing. What Thomas was doing wasn't a trick. It was the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The decision cycle forged in real survival. He was always observing faster, adjusting sooner, forcing Ryan to attack inside the past version of himself. When an opponent's balance is broken, the brain loses proprioception, the body's sense of position, for half a beat. And in that half beat, everything falls apart. Ryan staggered to his feet one last time, desperation driving him forward. Thomas didn't step back, not even half a pace. He turned his body slightly, caught the wrist, shifted a fraction. And in a single breath, Ryan's face hit the mat. His arm was pinned beneath the calm, effortless weight of experience. No flourish, no violence, only control, complete, unquestionable. Ryan gasped, struggling uselessly. Thomas's hand held firm, not cruel, just enough to end it. Then he released, stepping back once. Ryan rose shakily, his face caught somewhere between fear and confusion. He couldn't look at the crowd, only at the black man standing before him. Everyone in the dojo understood then. This wasn't just a veteran. He was something beyond that. Ryan's breath came ragged. His GI clung with sweat. His shoulders trembled. Not from exhaustion, but unease. Thomas stood upright, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady. No smile, no triumph. His silence filled the room more completely than any applause ever could. Whispers crackled through the air like sparks. "Did you see that? He didn't hit, he just redirected." That's not dojo technique. That's something else. The kids who'd giggled earlier now sat straight-backed, eyes wide. Parents leaned forward, then fell silent, unable to name what they'd just witnessed. Harold tapped his cane softly against the wooden floor, his face pale as memory broke open. His voice trembled. "I've seen it before. Men who move like that don't fight to score points. They move to end danger, fast, clean, quiet." Ryan's face burned. Pride refused to let him stop. He lunged again, sloppy, desperate. Thomas shifted a fraction, placing a hand gently on the back of his neck. No force, no pressure, just a touch. And Ryan collapsed. His shoulders sank, knees gave way, head bowed. His strength left him as if someone had pulled the plug. The whole room froze. Even Alvarez, usually composed, leaned forward, jaw tightening. His voice came low, steady. "That's not the stance of a student. That's the presence of a man who carries something the rest of us can't touch." Thomas met Alvarez's eyes, heavy, wordless. Ryan bowed his head, his pride fractured. For the first time, he looked small. The energy in the room shifted. No longer awkward, but reverent. Ryan made one final, furious attempt, a clumsy strike thrown out of humiliation. Thomas didn't back away. He stepped into the line of attack, turned his axis, redirected the force, and Ryan hit the mat with a sharp, wooden thud. Then, silence. Thomas didn't restrain him, didn't add another move. He stood still, hands loose, gaze steady. There was no need for a finishing blow. His presence was the ending. Ryan lay sprawled, staring up at the ceiling, and for the first time, understood that the fight was over. A ripple of murmurs spread, soft, reverent. No laughter. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something beyond sport. Alvarez stood, hand braced on his knee. "That's enough," he said firmly. "It's over." Thomas gave a small nod. No bow, no speech. He stepped back, silent, yet commanding. Ryan sat up, trembling, his chest heaving. But there was something new in his eyes. Respect. No one moved. Only the sound of Ryan's ragged breathing and the faint hum of fluorescent lights filled the air. Thomas clasped his hands together, standing quietly as if nothing had happened. But that calm itself settled over everyone like a weight. Harold, who had been silent all this time, leaned forward, his cane shaking. He spoke, voice breaking. "My God, I know you." All eyes turned. Ryan froze, looking between Harold and Thomas. Harold's lips trembled. "Kandahar, 1989. I read the report. Missions no one came back from. I remember. They called you when no one else returned." The room sank into absolute stillness. Some students looked confused, but the older fathers, the veterans, sat upright, a flicker of recognition in their eyes. Whispers spread, soft and reverent. "Thomas Hale," Harold exhaled. "Commander, Delta Force, the ghost of the valley." A collective gasp rippled through the dojo. Even Alvarez's composure faltered. He looked at Thomas and saw no denial, only the quiet acceptance of a man who had carried too much for too long. Ryan's face turned pale. His mockery and arrogance crumbled into ash. His lips quivered before he finally stammered, "Sir, I don't know." Thomas said nothing. His silence weighed more than any words could, and the entire room bowed under it. They understood then. The black man standing by the wall was a shadow the world thought it had lost. The next morning, the dojo smelled the same, sweat and cleaning solution, the same worn mats, the same sunlit walls, but something unseen lingered. Students spoke softly. Their movements were sharper, more mindful. Even the rowdiest boys trained with purpose. Ryan arrived early and swept the floor, something he had never done before. His steps were slower now, deliberate. The arrogance in his eyes had faded, replaced by humility. Every so often he glanced toward the door, as if waiting for Thomas to return, but he never did. Later, Alvarez asked quietly, "Would you teach?" "Maybe one class," someone suggested. Thomas shook his head. "I've taught enough." That single word, enough, felt like closing the final page of a long life. 3 weeks passed. The schedule went on, but Thomas's shadow remained. Students stood taller. They thought before they struck. Ryan changed too. Fewer words, more listening, more respect. Above the doorway hung a single silver dog tag. No one touched it, but everyone who walked beneath could feel its weight. Harold stopped by more often. Some days he just sat quietly, cane resting across his knees, eyes distant. Other days he smiled faintly, as if remembering a truth only men of his generation could fully grasp. As for Thomas, few ever saw him again. Once in a while, someone would glimpse him at dusk, walking along the sidewalk, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, stride steady and calm. He never waved, never paused, just passed by, leaving behind something larger than himself. For Ryan, that night became a scar, not of shame, but of growth. A scar that reminded him how to stand, how to breathe, how to overcome the weight within. Those who had been there never bragged about it. They kept it, like a whispered legend, of a man who opened only when life demanded it, who didn't fight to win, but to remind. The dojo changed. The dog tag above the door gleamed softly, a quiet truth left behind by Thomas Hale. Within that dojo, people had witnessed many punches, many victories, but never a silence so powerful. An old man who didn't shout, didn't boast, taught an entire room the most important lesson. True strength doesn't come from muscle. It comes from discipline, self-control, and respect. Ryan came to prove himself, but he became the one who was taught. Thomas came not to fight, but he awakened the good that still lived in everyone there. On one side stood youth, arrogant and convinced that victory lay in the strike. On the other stood a man who had learned that true victory is when you no longer need to strike. And still, the world grows quiet around you. And perhaps that's a lesson for all of us. Silence isn't weakness. It's the strength of someone who truly knows their own limits. What does Thomas Hale's story make you think of? In your life, have you ever met someone whose mere presence changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the truest stories remind us most deeply of humility and strength. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your journey.